We're going to start, Mark, in the Premier League. Liverpool's defeat against Chelsea. If you were a Liverpool fan, would you be worried about what's happening at the moment, or is this just a blip?
No, I'd be worried. I'd be worried because I think even when they were winning games at the start of the season, there were obvious flaws in the games where you're thinking, well, they got away with it there. Now, obviously, Bournemouth, this game of the season, 2 up. Bournemouth led for 2-2 before Liverpool ran away with it at the end. Newcastle away. Newcastle out of 10 men, pulled a 2-goal deficit back before Liverpool won late on. So there've definitely been signs. And obviously, the Atletico Madrid game of the Champions League was very edgy as well. So I think what's happened the last week, it's the manner of the defeats as well. I mean, the Galatasaray defeat in the Champions League was probably a little bit different in the sense that it was a kind of a dubious penalty, but Crystal Palace away and Chelsea away, both very, very late goals, which is almost like Liverpool having it on the foot, really, because Liverpool have been winning games late. And I think the Palace win was deserved for Palace. I think Chelsea obviously edged it at the weekend. So, when they were winning those games, I did think that, it wasn't quite knitting together. And Liverpool were playing in a certain way that, for me, obviously last season, it was a very kind of a solid three-man midfield, and that was why Liverpool was so successful. They dominated teams in midfield, they worked harder than anybody else, and they had the extra body. Now, what I've seen of Liverpool this season, it looks like they're playing 4-2-4 because of the attacking players they've got. Whether it's Salah or Florian Wirtz, they're not dropping back and not doing enough for the midfield. So that 2 midfield is getting outnumbered. I think that's the situation, really. Arne Slot has got to find a formula to ensure that he can have his attacking players in the team at the same time as having enough people in midfield to avoid being overrun. I mean, obviously, Moises Caicedo had a fantastic game for Chelsea at the weekend, but still, Liverpool's issue so far this season and potentially going forward is that they haven't got enough in midfield to, I don't think, win the title.
I mean, I know that we did a kind of a preview pod, didn't we, at the start of the season? I certainly picked Liverpool to be champions. Obviously, they're going through a bit of a blip now. I think kind of the issues that they're dealing with are perhaps ones that were identified before the start of the season. Do they have enough in defence? Are they going to keep teams out? Is Florian Wirtz going to hit the ground running? Is Alexander Isak going to hit the ground running? In my mind, you would still expect players like Wirtz and Isak eventually to kind of get up to speed, and then that kind of takes Liverpool to a different level. I know that Arsenal are kind of quietly kind of built a little bit of a run themselves, but in your mind, Mark, are you still looking at Liverpool as a team to beat in a title race, or do you think that's flipped a little bit and now Arsenal should be favourites?
I did actually have Arsenal to win this title at the start of the season, so I'm going to pat myself on the head for that a little bit, and I still think that's the case. I think Liverpool have done too much in the summer. We're all focusing on the players they brought in, and they brought in, a lot of top quality players. Alexander Isak, Florian Wirtz, like you say, all these players. Ekatiké's had a great start, but we're not talking about the players that aren't there anymore. And for all the criticism that he had as a defender, Trent Alexander-Arnold was a massive part of Liverpool's game going forward, and also he wasn't as bad a defender as people said. He could do a job. So they've lost a real kind of asset down there, and I don't think either Conor Bradley or Jeremy Frimpong have got what it takes just yet to fill the gap. And obviously we've seen Dominic Szoboszlai's played there at times and he's done really well, but he's not a right back. At left back, I don't think Kirkez has settled in yet, and I think he's playing way too often in terms of Andy Robertson still available. Now, Andy Robertson obviously is a player that has served Liverpool well, and maybe he's not as young as he was, but he can still do a much more disciplined job than Kirkez. So you've got two issues. Both your fullback situations are all over the place right now. Defensively, they're not playing well. Van Dijk, Virgil van Dijk is like this untouchable god, isn't he? You can't criticise Virgil van Dijk, but there's been plenty of occasions this season where Van Dijk has been at fault. I mean, if you've seen the still for the Moises Caicedo goal, he turns his back and says he's not have a shot. So, Van Dijk, great as he is, great leader, he's not had a great season. Konate's not had a great season either. Mo Salah has not done anything this season in terms of, bringing to the table what he did last season. So there's lots of issues, and we're talking about the players they've lost. They've lost, Darwin Núñez brought a lot of energy to the team. Luis Diaz brought goals and energy. And obviously the tragic loss of Diogo Jota, who was a player that they could always rely upon to work hard and score goals. Now, the players that have come in are still finding their feet. And I think Arne Slot, last season, he did a fantastic job of coming in when Jurgen Klopp had left and there was a massive hole to fill in terms of his personality, his presence. But he did that in a way, he just kind of tinkered with the team but didn't do too much when he didn't have to. And I think the players, that was basically Klopp's team last season won the league. Well, it was because he only brought in one player, that was Chiesa, and he barely played. So Klopp's team won the league for Liverpool last season. But because Arne Slot left them to be Klopp's team and left them to win the league. This season, Klopp's team is slightly broken up a little bit. And his old stages like Van Dijk and Salah aren't playing as well as they have done. And it's difficult now. It's difficult for Slot to manage the transition, which has come a year late, and find, maybe this is, when Sir Alex Ferguson left Man United, his great team won the title in his last season and he moved off the stage. When David Moyes came in, the team had not gone over the hill a bit. Maybe that situation has happened now with Liverpool, that the great Klopp team had a great year last year under a new manager, and the new manager this season is going to find it much harder to get the best out of those players that he inherited at the same time as assimilating the players that he's brought in.
Obviously a bad day for Liverpool, but a good day for Chelsea and Enzo Maresca. I know that we were both at the United-Chelsea game a couple of weeks ago, and you didn't really get a sense that you kind of learned very much about Chelsea because of that early red card and the substitutions that Maresca had to make very, very early on. Maresca seems to go through this kind of roller coaster of being under pressure and then pulling out a result out of nowhere and getting lauded and then back under pressure again. I mean, where do you stand on Chelsea and what their expectation should be this season? Are you looking at title challenges? Are you looking at a team that just can't put the run of consistency together to get to that point?
Yeah, I don't think the title challenges, and I don't think they have the team and the kind of the cohesion. Or I don't think Maresca's a title-winning manager, but it's a strange season so far. So who knows? But I do think Arsenal are the favourites, and I think Liverpool and Man City probably together are the two teams that are most likely to challenge Arsenal. I think we've kind of overlooked City a little bit because of certain situations at the club and players that have lost, players that have come through. But Erling Haaland has stepped up a level this season, so I think City are real contenders. But Chelsea, you just don't know what you're going to get with Chelsea. They've got such a young squad that I think that kind of means there will be inconsistencies. Alejandro Garnacho's had a good start, but you can't rely on Alejandro Garnacho to maintain that good start and be consistent. They bought really well in João Pedro. I think he's a fantastic centre forward, but there's something about Chelsea I'm just not convinced about. And I think the game at Old Trafford kind of showed them in the best case Chelsea and the worst case Chelsea. So it's hard to see them challenging. But, what's your view on it, Rob? Obviously, Chelsea have spent a lot of money. They've brought players from all over the place and they've got about 100 players. But do you think they are a team that can challenge for the title this season?
Well, I mean, I don't think they're as far in their development as, say, Liverpool and Arsenal are. And I think that matters quite a lot. So when it comes to kind of March and April, when the pressure really starts to tell, I just think that Liverpool and Arsenal, possibly City, you mentioned there about Erling Haaland being on fire again. I think those three teams are more able to cope with that. I would have liked to see Chelsea properly in that game against United and actually had a proper look at them live to see how good they are. But they do just feel to me like they're quite inconsistent, that on any given day, they've got the players to beat Liverpool, beat anyone in the league, beat Chelsea or beat Arsenal or whoever. I just feel that when it comes to those kind of Saturday 3 o'clocks at Stamford Bridge, that maybe when you need that kind of little spark to get your team over the line, that perhaps they don't really have that, or don't have that enough to string enough wins together to get you in that title mix. I mean, you would expect them to challenge or be around the top four again. And I think having qualified for the Champions League last season, I think anything less than that now for Enzo Maresca would be quite damaging. I don't think that you could go back to being kind of a Europa League, Conference League side, even though the top of the Premier League is quite competitive. So in my mind, he has to qualify for the Champions League as a minimum. What they're able to do beyond that, I just haven't seen enough really to suggest that they are able to kind of match Liverpool and Arsenal and City in terms of consistency. And you mentioned players like Alejandro Garnacho. I would put, João Pedro, Moises Caicedo. They're obviously very, very good players, but are they going to do it 15 games on the bounce? Possibly not. They've obviously got an issue at centre half as well. The centre halves are losing them like nobody's business at the moment, and the decision not to sign another centre half at the end of the transfer window will probably come back to bite them a little bit, because I don't think you can go through a Premier League season with your fifth and sixth choice in that position. It's just the Premier League is too strong to be able to cope with that. So I imagine that Enzo Maresca, as good a result as it was against Liverpool at the weekend, will still be looking at his team and thinking, if we can finish fourth, that's probably a good season with the tools that he's got.
They've also not got a goalkeeper that you can say is a top class goalkeeper. I think Sanchez, as we saw at Old Trafford, he can make bad decisions. And I think one thing that's helping Chelsea at the minute is actually the injuries, because it means that Maresca's having to be a bit more consistent with his selection. So obviously, when you're losing your best, I mean, Cole Palmer right now, Palmer's probably Chelsea's best player, but he doesn't really fit into a system at Chelsea. And he plays well at Chelsea. in spite of Maresca's system, not because of it. And I think in the past he's had a bit of a moan power about the way that Chelsea plays. Certainly the Conference League final when he basically took it upon himself to win the game because he wasn't happy about all the sideways passes. So, Chelsea can't afford to leave out Cole Palmer when he's fit, but then when he plays him, does it upset the system? Because right now they've got wingers flying down both sides and it works, but that's the problem, that Chelsea got so many players that it can actually destabilise them when they get to the point where they have to have some consistency. But I think that, for me, there's definitely a clear top three in the sense of Arsenal, Liverpool, Man City. I think City will surprise people this year by really challenging. But beyond that, I think Chelsea are probably number 4 right now. Who knows about Tottenham? Who knows about Man United? It's been such a weird season so far. Newcastle as well. That Newcastle and United are both kind of hovering around mid-table. But if they began to get a bit of confidence, if United can somehow win back-to-back games, I know the next game is Liverpool away. So, well, United haven't won there since 2016. Maybe that kind of turn of fortune could come at Anfield, and who knows? I mean, maybe I'm kind of talking fantasy here, but if United got a result at Anfield, that would be back-to-back wins, and then who knows? There are enough teams that are knocking around that could get 4th or 5th place. I think there's definitely 4 or 5 chasing that, so it'd be interesting to see. But I think Chelsea right now are probably they're occupying that 4th spot of the best teams in the country, but they're not a title-winning side. But Rob, just while we're talking about Newcastle, they won yesterday, beat Nottingham Forest. So they won on Sunday, beat Nottingham Forest 2-0. Ange Postecoglou, 7 games in, no wins. How long do you give him?
Well, I think it's a really odd fit. I thought it was an odd fit from the minute that it was announced. It was obviously lined up well ahead of the official announcement because of the speed at which it was done. It's an odd fit, as many people have pointed out, that you go from Nuno Espirito Santo, who is kind of I don't want to say defensive manager, but is kind of defensively minded. And then you have someone like Postecoglou, who is kind of at his best, is an all-out attacking manager. That the switch between those two different styles is very, very difficult for any group of players, but particularly mid-season. I also think that the timing of it all doesn't help Postecoglou, because if you've got a new manager coming in, often a new manager coming in will replace a manager who has failed. And so you kind of come in on the wave of a little bit of optimism. That's not the case with Nottingham Forest, because Nuno did what he did with Forest last year and got them into Europe. Is kind of heralded for what he did at Forest. And now you've got Postecoglou coming in, kind of trying to build on that a little bit. And you're not coming in with as much goodwill as perhaps you are doing as if you replace a manager who has been sacked. On top of that, I also think that if you're coming in mid-season, it's a lot easier for a manager like Nuno to come in mid-season, because he is going to want to be defensive. He's going to want to be compact. He's going to want to stop goals going in and try and hit teams on the break. That is a lot easier to teach a group of players mid-season than, say, Postecoglou, who wants to come in and be immediately on the front foot. And he's talked about, the time it's going to take to kind of instill his philosophy into his players. Any manager coming in mid-season will tell you that. I just think it's a lot harder for a manager who wants to kind of move to a more attacking, expansive, forward-thinking style than it is for a manager coming in who wants to be a bit more compact. Now Postecoglou's in, I think that you have to give him time, because you could have seen all these things coming when he was appointed. You can't bring him in and go, I can't believe all this stuff's happened, and then sack him after 7 or 8 games, because that just doesn't make sense. You could have seen all this coming. Once you've made the decision to go from Nuno to Postecoglou, in my mind, and I know that I would always kind of veer towards giving managers more time than perhaps they deserve, that you have to say to Postecoglou, we're going to review it again in the summer. Like, let's see how far you get with this team. Let's see where we're at in the summer, and then take a view. To sack him after 7 or 8 games after encountering problems that anyone could have predicted seems strange to me, but it's modern football, so anything could happen.
Are we not always a bit bored with Ange, though? I mean, all he ever says after a game is, it's a fight, I'm a fighter, I'm ready for the balance, it's tough, I'm ready for the battle. It's like, well, he's making it a fight, because, like you said, he came into a situation where Forest had qualified for European football. They had a good start to the season. They won and drew the first 2 games. It wasn't like Forest had started the season badly. He's come in there in basically a dream scenario for a new coach and a winning team with a mentality of success, and he's turned it into a battle himself by, just having the wrong outlook for a team that is built on rock solid defense. So every time I hear him after a game, it's all about him. It's like, I'm a fighter, I'm ready for this. Well, it's a little bit tedious. Do you know what I mean? It's like, well, don't turn it into a fight. Just just give your players the instructions that they need. Don't try and confuse them and try and get some results on the board. And the fact that the Forest fans have turned on him, they were chanting you're getting sacked in the morning during the Europa League game against Midtjylland last week. That isn't ideal, but the Forest fans aren't stupid. Football fans generally know what their team is about, and they know that they've had a manager basically parachuted in on the whim of their owner because he wanted, Ange Postecoglou, because whether it's because he won the Europa League last year, I don't know, but let's not forget, Tottenham finished 17th last season. Now, they weren't going to get relegated because the bottom three were so far away, but this myth that Ange Postecoglou had a fantastic time at Spurs because he left them with the Europa League trophy is nonsense. He had their worst season in Premier League history last year, and he got a job that he doesn't deserve to get on the back of it. He really doesn't deserve to be the Nottingham Forest manager because Nuno has done a fantastic job there, and he's been fired for all the wrong reasons. And they brought in a guy who's completely incompatible with the squad. So, Ange Postecoglou probably wouldn't never turn a job down, but he probably should have looked at it and thought, is that job for me? Is that job right for me? Am I going in there is my way of working the right way for that squad? Probably not, but he's taken a job. So I don't think he can have any complaints about what's coming at him right now.
So a bad day for Postecoglou, a good day for another manager who's been under pressure recently, Ruben Amorim, a relatively routine 2-0 win against Sunderland. What did you make of that? Obviously a bit of respite for Amorim after a week of which his job's been spoken about again.
Yeah, well, listen, it was a routine win, and that's what Man United and Ruben Amorim have been desperate for, a routine win, because all the wins so far this season have been dramatic or chaotic or anything but routine. So to have a 2-0 win at home, 3 successive home wins, it means that there is a bit of a positive kind of upwards trajectory now. It might not last, but the fact that they've got that result is fantastic. And I think, obviously, he made a big call with the decision to drop Altay Bayındır and bring in Seny Lamins in goal. And it was the right one, I think, I think we were at the game, the Derby game, the Man City game, and it was the first game that Lamins could have played. City gave a debut to Gianluigi Donnarumma, and he had a big impact in that game, but obviously Lamins didn't play. But you can't really compare Donnarumma and Seny Lamins. Donnarumma's a world-class goalkeeper, a Champions League winner, one of the best around. Lamins is a young keeper that is still learning his way, so to chuck him in at the Derby game would have been expecting too much. And I think Amorim's explanation that he needed him to adjust to his new club, his new teammates, his new surroundings, learn what was expected of him was the right thing to do. And I think, he could have played at Brentford last week, but probably good that he didn't, because I think maybe Amorim decided that the way that Brentford play, lots of long balls, lots of long throw-ins, it was probably unfair to throw in a young goalkeeper with that kind of bombardment. So Bayındır played, letting 3 goals. So Sunderland at home, a great way to start ahead of much more difficult test against Liverpool at Anfield next time after the international break. But Lamins looked solid. I mean, you were there, Rob. You were saying that the vibe around the stadium was just one of just a much more relieved atmosphere with a goalkeeper in the goal that was just not doing anything silly.
Well, yeah, I mean, he didn't have an awful lot to do. He's made 1 save from Granit Xhaka from a shot from the edge of the box, which is turned around the post. He's made 1 in the last minute with the game kind of already won at 2-0. The biggest cheers of the day were 2 deep crosses that get pumped into United's box at the back post, and Lamins kind of steps out, comes over a load of bodies and catches the ball. United have scored two good goals, but genuinely the biggest cheers of the day was for Seny Lamins coming out and catching those balls, which probably shows how starved United have been, or United fans have been, of a really, a proper, assured goalkeeper. At the end of the game, they were singing "Are You Schmeichel in disguise?" And often think that it's not easy for Man United players having all this pressure put on them. It perhaps doesn't help when the Stretford end is singing "Are You Schmeichel in disguise?" as much as Seny Lamins, I imagine, loved it when he heard it. But it just shows, how maybe how low the bar is at Man United, that you can have a keeper who, really was competent on the day. That's all he was. He saved the stuff he was meant to save. He caught the stuff he was meant to catch, and all of a sudden he's been kind of carried out of the stadium as some kind of hero. It says everything really about the goalkeepers who he's taken over from. I think, like you said there, Amorim's played it pretty well with Lamins. He could have brought him in for the derby. He didn't. I think he won't say, or he certainly didn't say after the game, but I imagine he had penciled in that Sunderland game possibly as the game to give Seny Lamins his debut, because 3:00 at Old Trafford, if you're going to start at Man United, that's probably the time to do it. Obviously, it didn't help that Storm Amy's kind of ravaging Man United, Manchester at the time, and the wind and the rain probably didn't help him, but he dealt with that quite well. Obviously, you've pointed out there that there's an international break now, and then there's a massive game against Liverpool at Anfield, so you'll probably find out an awful lot more about Sarah Lamins against Liverpool than perhaps you did against Sunderland, but a good start nonetheless.
I mean, you might disagree with this, but I don't think United had a goalkeeper that can catch the ball since Edwin van der Sar. And the point I'm making is that when David De Gea came in, he really struggled for his first 6 months. And throughout his time at United, as great as a shot stopper as he was never very convincing with the ball in the air. Corners, crosses. David De Gea was always hesitant coming off his line. I think it was an issue with the defence that they struggled at times to know what he was going to do. And obviously, the less said about Andre Onana and Altay Bayinde with the ball in the air, the better. But it's been one game, so I'm not saying that Sonny Lamins is the new Edwin van der Sar by any means. But I think it's important from a defensive perspective that you know that your goalkeeper behind you is going to come for crosses and going to come for long throw-ins. And the game is changing now. The game is no longer one that's played on the ground. It's becoming much more direct again with long throw-ins, long balls, big cross into the penalty area. So if you're a defender and you know your goalkeeper behind you is prepared to come for those balls, that's a massive thing. It means that United can play 5-10 yards further up the pitch. It means that they can, just take a few more chances because they haven't been able to do that with Onana and Bayinde. And, for many times under David De Gea, there's the same situation. So who knows, maybe United have turned back the clock to the Edwin van der Sar years, not the Schmeichel years, and they've got a goalkeeper that they can rely upon once again to catch the ball when it comes in the air.
Well, we're going to take a short break now. Coming up next, we're going to talk about Lamine Yamal and the workload that is being put on such a young player. Mark's written a piece that is going to be on ESPN.com, and we're going to be joined by Barcelona correspondent Sam Marsden to talk about it. Well, Lamine Yamal missed Barcelona's 4-1 defeat at Seville on Sunday with a groin injury. It's his second injury of the season. We're joined now by our Barcelona correspondent, Sam Marsden, but we're going to start with you, Mark. You've written a piece about Lamine Yamal, and perhaps this isn't a massive surprise that he's injured again.
No, so obviously I think we discussed this last week on the pod that FIFPro put a 51-page report out about how players have been overworked in recent months and years, and they actually did a case study on Lamine Yamal as part of their young players being overworked element of it. And obviously, Yamal is the rising star in the world of football right now. He's only 18 and he's a player that's got a massive future, probably a future Ballon d'Or winner, future everything winner, I guess. But the concern is that he's playing too many games. Now, if you look at the stats, I mean, the stats are kind of extraordinary. If you look at Lamine Yamal, by the time he was 18, he played 130 games for club and country. Now, the next player on the list is Pau Kubasi at Barcelona, 69 games. So that kind of shows you how much Lamine Yamal is being overworked right now. Now, obviously, people will say, well, he's young enough, he can deal with it, he's a superstar, why wouldn't Spain or Barcelona want to play him all the time? But just to give you another stat, his games or minutes on the pitch at the age of 18 are 31% higher than Jude Bellingham's. So he really is being overplayed and overworked. And obviously, we're talking today after the Sevilla game. He's ruled out of the Spain World Cup qualifiers due to injury. It's his second injury of the season. So, you've got to be careful with young players. And so within the report, we've got Dr. Darren Burgess, who used to be the performance director at Liverpool and Arsenal, soon to be joining Juventus, talking about how young players, their bodies aren't fully developed until maybe the age of 25. So, when you get injuries, groin strains, muscle pulls, breaks, it has an implication down the line. And this is where we're at with Lamine Yamal. I mean, obviously Sam will know better than me because he watches Barcelona all the time. Is it a concern, Sam, that Yamal is playing too much, or is it a case of, well, he's our player, we'll play him off as often as we like?
Yeah, we obviously speak to Flick, Barca coach Hansi Flick, a lot about this, not just Lamine Yamal, but about other players. Obviously, we've had high-profile examples at Barcelona in the past with, Pedri had a series of injuries and is now playing regularly. He's come through that, but, due to overplaying at a young age, certainly with Pedri. Gavi's ACL, perhaps not to do with overplaying, but different circumstances, but he's again had a relapse and is out. So we speak to Flick about this, and he always sort of maintains, we've got, and it's true, Barcelona in general, since Flick's come in, they've improved in sort of terms of injury prevention, in terms of recovery time and whatnot, and fitness and strength, etc. And he maintains, obviously, that, they're training in the vests every day and tracking data. And he says he knows when players need to rest and whatnot. But I think there are certain things that doesn't tell. Like you say, Lamine Yamal has been, 16, 17, 18-year-old playing for Barcelona. You need to factor in that this is a kid that is still growing. It's easy to forget how young he is, given how long he's been around. And perhaps the data shows that he is okay, but perhaps sometimes it is better to say, look, step back and don't play so much. We've asked him about Lamine quite a lot, and about Pedri as well, because Pedri's obviously overplayed. And they've actually told us, Flick's explained, Pedri's explained, that they actually did a lot of testing on Pedri when he was getting lots of injuries. Obviously, had that breakout first season, and then he went and played for Spain at the Euros and the Olympics, and then he had sort of 2 or 3 years really struggling with injuries. And they actually reckon that Pedri's type of body is actually better playing every 3 days, and that if he stops and starts, he he gets more injured. But then you get the sort of problem after the PSG game last week when Flick's going, Pedri's tired. So it's kind of like striking that balance. But there's absolutely no doubt that Lamine Yamal has been overplayed. I don't think too much. I think it's difficult to strike that balance. But obviously you've got Hansi Flick, who I don't see him being the Barcelona coach for a long time, perhaps 1-2 years more. Wants to win. You've got Luis de la Fuente, the Spain coach, wants to win. He's got a World Cup next summer. They're thinking about winning short term. They're not thinking about Lamine Yamal's long-term career. And the player's too young, really, to have a grip on that type of thing. You could say that, the player could take responsibility and say no or whatnot, but it's difficult to put that burden on a 17, 18-year-old.
Sam, I mean, is there a club versus country row kind of brewing with, we're talking about Lamine Yamal and also sort of Gavi and Pedri as well. Obviously, Barcelona will want their best players to play for them week in, week out, and will be a bit nervous, I imagine, sending them off to international duty, particularly in a World Cup year when there's obviously a massive tournament at the end of the year.
No, not brewing. We're fully in the middle of a sort of a club v country row at the moment. Obviously, Lamine Yamal went away with Spain in September, aggravated a groin injury, came back to Barcelona, and Hansi Flick said Spain did not take care of him. They're not taking care of their young players. He said that they made him take sort of painkilling injections to play 2 World Cup qualifiers against Bulgaria and Turkey. And he played over 70 minutes in both those games, came back, missed 4 games for Barca because of this groin injury. And it was perhaps the most sort of, certainly the loudest. Flick sort of stays away from making headlines or whatnot. And he was asked about that this week, and he said, I was loud because I needed to be loud sort of at that time, and I don't regret it. Came back to Barca, and he sort of re-aggravated that injury. He was then called up for Spain on the Friday after he'd aggravated the injury, and then dropped out later in the day. So we've got those issues sort of bubbling on. Luis de la Fuente has been very sort of stern, sort of to the point where he's sort of just sort of so stubborn and not really admitting anything. And you can see that, this is probably more opinion than sort of information, but you can see when you've got a press conference, and even, the press in Spain are divided between Real Madrid and Barcelona. And even the Real Madrid journalists are taking De La Fuente to task, accusing him sort of taking risks with Lamine Yamal, etc. And it happened again the same day because Marc Bernal, young Barcelona midfielder, 18, he's just come back from an ACL injury. He's made 3 appearances off the bench, never more for 11 minutes, was named in the Spain under-21 squad for this international break. And Flick was again said he had no clue what Spain were doing. And about an hour later, they withdrew him from the squad. So there's that tension there between Barca and the national team at the moment.
I mean, I think one issue here is that, people look at Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi and say, well, look, if you look after yourself, you can play until your late 30s, 40. And those two are complete exceptions, aren't they? Because the 2 players that I've mentioned in my piece in terms of young players that are basically asked to do too much at too young an age are Wayne Rooney and Michael Owen. Now, we know that both those players burst onto the global scene at a major tournament when they were 18. Michael Owen at the World Cup in 98, Rooney at the Euros in 2004. A little bit like Lamine Yamal at Euro 2024, and he was only 16 at the time. But the situation is, both Rooney and Owen played many times. Certainly came back from injury too soon for England. I mean, obviously, we know that Wayne Rooney's World Cup in 2006 was ruined by the fact that he had a metatarsal injury prior to the tournament. Michael Owen I think, had a similar situation when he was young with a hamstring injury. Now, both those players, that their international careers were done with, they're over and done with by the time they were 30 years old. Now, are we getting to the point where the Lamine Yamals of this world are going to have a fantastic 10-year career, but once they get to their late 20s, they're just going to be so physically burnt out by playing too many games, not allowing the injuries to recover when they were younger, that we're going to see our great players have much shorter careers. Now, the 20-year career that Messi and Ronaldo had, that seems to be something that's just a freak. That's never going to happen again. But it would be a real shame, Rob. I guess, you've seen plenty of young players at United over the years and Man City, that if these superstar players are going to be done by the time they're age 30 years old. Yeah,
I mean, I was just thinking then that it would be an awful shame if Lamine Yamal, for some reason, wasn't able to play at the next World Cup. If he's played so many games, he's picked up so many sort of niggling injuries that he's not at the World Cup, because the whole point of a World Cup is to give a platform to the best players in the world. Obviously, Lamine Yamal is very much in that group. And you mentioned there Wayne Rooney and Michael Owen. I think from fans who have watched the Premier League for an awful lot of time will reference those 2 players who obviously achieved a lot and won a lot, but when they were kind of coming through at 18, 19, 20, really it looked like they were going to be kind of the best in the world for a long period of time. And Wayne Rooney in particular obviously achieved everything at Man United and is a club's record goal scorer and has won the Champions League. But there was kind of a feeling around the time that he was 30 that he was probably done. Now, he will probably tell you that he developed very, very early, so he was able to play man's football at 16 in a way that lots of players coming through the system can't play, and they have to wait till 20, 21, 22 to maybe develop to the point where they can compete in men's football. And obviously Wayne Rooney was able to do that as a teenager, but really around sort of 30, 31. And Mark, you'll have seen the same having covered Man United, that it really felt like at the time where he should have really, really been at his physical peak and his peak in terms of his experience and everything kind of coming together to make him the complete player, that instead of being kind of right at the top, he was almost sort of over the hill and already on his way down a little bit, which, for someone who watched Man United an awful lot, despite what he achieved, was a little bit of a disappointment, because there is that kind of nagging feeling possibly that he never really hit the heights that he should have done.
Yeah, and that is probably the concern with Yamal, in the sense that he's been in the game, 2.5 years now? I think he was 15 when he made his debut. I think April 2023, I think Sam will correct me if I'm wrong. 2.5 years now. He's not had a lot of injuries, but he's had enough. I think he's missed 17, 18 games now for club and country in that time. But the issue is it's the muscle strains, it's the groin strains, it's the thigh strains, it's the cumulative effect. If they don't recover properly, they become a problem later down the line. So by the time they're 23, 24, 25, these injuries that have been affecting the players during their teenage years, when they come back quickly because they're young, they're full of energy and they recover quickly, actually they haven't recovered that quickly because the body is still kind of developing. So those injuries that they get when they're 16, 17, 18, they'll hang over them when they're in the late 20s. Now, the balancing act is, how do you find a way? If you're Barcelona and Spain, obviously Barcelona will challenge for the La Liga, they'll challenge for the Champions League. Spain will always be challenging at the sharp end of the major tournaments. There aren't really many free hits in terms of games. You can't really say, well, we can take you out of this competition because we're not that bothered about it. It really is a case of, you're our best player, you're going to play because we want to win these games. And you have to think, well, next year you've got a World Cup, so 2026 summer's taken care of. Then 2027, is it going to be some of the 2027 before Lamine Yamal has some time off? Because that's the only kind of, at this stage, it's the only free summer, because who knows what's going to happen. Are we going to have another Club World Cup crowbarred into the schedule then? But so he's saying right now that he's been playing pretty much for 2 years solid. And the next 18 months, 2 years is going to be football. So he's going to get to 2027 where he can have his first break. Who knows what sort of injuries he's having to recover from by then. And another element that was put to me in this study as well was it's the psychological impact as well. It's the pressure of being a 17, 18-year-old playing for Barcelona, playing for Spain, playing for the biggest teams in the world, and the scrutiny that they're under. Because obviously Sam will see this a lot, in Spain. Every single day there's intense coverage of Barcelona. Every single day there's intense coverage of Lamine Yamal. How is he handling that? Now, he might be handling it great, but we know there's been a couple of instances with parties that people think, well, should he be doing that? Should he not be doing that? So it's how he handles it. And he's got every right to have a party, but at some point, it's the strain of playing on your body and on your mind that will or could derail these young superstars.
Sam, can I just ask, though, ahead of the World Cup next summer, Spain will obviously be one of the favourites, as they always are for these major tournaments, but how big a blow would it be if Lamine Yamal is not fit enough to be at his top level, or even misses a tournament altogether? Are you talking about taking essentially their best player out of that team?
Yeah, I think the difference Lamine Yamal makes is he's obviously not the sort of, the typical player you'd associate with Spain. So if you sort of look back at the Spain team that won, 2008, 10, 12, obviously they had great strikers, but they were quite sort of, very sort of possession based. And over the years that came sort of, for want of a better word, slightly boring and predictable over the years, that they sort of started losing again before this sort of the rebirth of the current generation. And what Lamine had, you've still got that sort of, the essence of Spain with Rodri, with Pedri, with, Fabian Ruiz or whoever, the midfielders, etc. But what Lamine had is unpredictability. He can, draw 2 or 3 players to him, which creates space for others. He can create something from nothing. There are perhaps Nico Williams does that as well on the left. But in terms of, what he adds, there's no one that can add anything like him. So for Spain to be without him, they lose, huge percentage of what makes them a great team in those really big games. And he's a player, like Mark says, talking about the psychological side of things. In general, from what we see publicly, I've not seen a teenager have sort of bounce off the pressure and the sort of, the media reports or whatever there is said about him as much as Lamine does, in terms of, comments he makes and stuff, sort of feeding into that, etc. Whether that's sort of, problematic for him behind the scenes or not, we don't know. But in terms of, how he stands up in big games and stuff, he's already standing up as someone who believes he's the best player in the world. We saw it, in the Euros against France with that goal. We saw it with Barca in the Classico in the Champions League against Inter Milan. he's someone who really delivers in the big game. So you take that out of Spain and they lose a hell of a lot.
Rob, we may have a similar situation in England in the Premier League. Max Diamond's been playing for Arsenal. He's 15 years old. He's not 16 until December. So are we kind of looking at Yamal thinking this same sort of thing could happen to Max Diamond? I know that Mikel Arteta is using him quite sparingly at the moment, but he was taken on the pre-season tour to the Far East. He's a kid that's already in the first team squad at 15. So what sort of lessons can Arsenal learn from Barcelona and Yamal with Max Diamond? Because obviously it looks like a great young talent coming through.
I mean, there is always that danger with a young player coming through, because your natural instinct is to give him as much experience as possible. Because I know we talked then about young players developing physically and how important that is. It's also important that they get the experience of men's football, whether that's in the under 21s or actually in the first team squad, in that first team environment. If they're going to push on to be as good as you hope they will be, instinctively you would say, well, we need to give them as much experience as possible, as quickly as possible, because that gets them to that level quicker. I mean, it would be radical, but I would actually be in favour of the Premier League or the FA or FIFA or UEFA, whoever it is, putting in kind of load management clauses into these young players' contracts, because I do think that often the tendency is to play young players too much. I think that if there was some kind of written rule about how often they are allowed to play, maybe the minutes that they were allowed to play or the percentage of minutes, it would kind of look to preserve their careers a little bit and maybe push them to go a little bit longer, because the danger is that you just play far too much, far too young, and that by the time you're mid-20s or 30 in the case of Wayne Rooney, that you just can't compete anymore. Now, I know that wouldn't go down particularly well. It probably wouldn't go down particularly well with the players either, because I know we speak a lot about the schedule and how kind of tough it is on the players. Often you'll find that the players will just say, well, I just want to play. Now, I know that's been different in the case of kind of Rodri, who's suggested that players should strike, but a lot of players, if you get them privately, will always say that they will want to play. So imagine telling someone like Lamine Yamal or Max Diamond that actually you played 30 minutes on Saturday, you can't play another 30 minutes for 2 weeks. So it would be a radical approach. But the danger is that you do put too much pressure and give these players too much minutes in the legs at a young age, and they just cannot ever reach their potential. And you're right, it's obviously very, very early in Max Diamond's career, but if he reaches the point at which we all expect him to and is as good as we all expect him to be, then there's going to be an awful lot of pressure on Mikel Arteta at Arsenal to put him in the team week after week. He'll be picked very, very soon for international football, and all of a sudden you'll be writing the same piece you have done about Lamine Yamal, about him, because again, he's put thousands and thousands of minutes in his legs before he's even out of his teenage years. And it's a big ask for these young players. And I would support something coming in to protect them a little bit, even if they probably don't want to protect themselves.
I guess the question...
Yeah, sorry.
So I guess the question coming down the line is, will Max Diamond make the England squad for the World Cup at 16? It's possible, because obviously Yamal made it with Spain at 16 at the Euros, and he looks a real talent. But, Sam, I mean, I remember Phil Foden coming through at Man City, and Pep was really kind of cautious with him, and, Phil's had his injuries, so you can't really say that that's proof that you should rest players. Obviously, Cristiano Ronaldo at Man United didn't play a lot for his first couple of years, and maybe he's reaping the benefit of that now. I mean, is there anything that Barcelona can learn from those?
Yeah, I was actually going to say about Phil Foden, because from the outside, that did feel a little bit like, Robin, yourself will know more, that, the feeling was perhaps that Pep was holding back a little bit in those early years. I think the difference with Lamine and with Darwin, perhaps, in terms of, I place Darwin with Foden, is that Arteta and Guardiola have got squads which are, full of stars, and there's not a dependency on, bringing Foden in at that time or on bringing Darwin in now when you've just signed, Eze. You've got all the strikers and attackers that Arsenal have got, whereas Lamine obviously came through at a time when Barcelona were desperate for some sort of star power, and it was a narrative that the club could sell. Look at this great young star from La Masia, and then on top of that, obviously the expectations were already high. But for him to then, obviously, because you never know how he's going to adapt to senior football, for him to adapt so quickly and become the star, there became a dependency on him so quickly. But yeah, like you said about Foden, I was just wondering if there were cases, because obviously of players that had been sort of drip fed minutes or whatnot, and when you come back to Messi as well, he wasn't without injury problems earlier in his career at Barcelona. It was only once he sort of got to his early 20s that he sort of moved them on and left them behind.
Well, we're going to say goodbye to Mark now. Sam, you're going to stay with us because after the break, we're going to be talking about the Women's Champions League, which is live this season on Disney+. Well, the Women's Champions League kicks off on Tuesday night. For fans across Europe, you can catch all 75 matches in this season's competition on Disney+. Sam is still with us. Thanks, Sam. And we're joined by Emily Keogh to talk about the tournament and the new look format. Can I start with you first, Emily? Just in terms of the format, a bit of a new look, a league phase mirroring the men's competition. Are you in favour? Are you expecting that to be a good thing for this competition?
Yeah, I'm actually really excited about it. I think we saw it work really well on the men's side, and we haven't for a really long time had big clashes at the start of the group stage. You know, you could kind of predict how the group's going to look the past couple of seasons. So it's really exciting that we've got big games early on. We've got repeats of last year's semi-finals in the opening games. And that's so exciting that we're actually getting a bit more of that intensity early on. Because I think it did get a little bit repetitive and a little bit boring the past couple of seasons. So I am really excited about it. And I think it throws up a lot of different stories and narratives for every single team. But it's just exciting for the fans of the clubs and of neutrals that early on you've got these big games coming, and it's exciting for everyone, I think.
And Sam, I mean, I know there's been a bit of debate about the changing format for the men's competition, whether people think that it's worked or not. The women's competition is going to be 18 teams, obviously one single league phase. Are you broadly in favour of that change as well?
Yeah, it's hard to say completely until we see it, but obviously, like you say, we've got the experience of seeing how it panned out with the men's competition last year. I think it's good for the women's competition because it expands the competition slightly. It brings in 2 more teams, which can only be good for, you know, the smaller teams getting exposure to playing against some of the biggest teams in Europe. And also it opens up the field a little bit in terms of that knockout round. Obviously, instead of 8 teams going through, you get 12, and then you get that slightly more even knockout round, which we presume will be, you know, some good ties, because we won't be seeing sort of perhaps the middle teams going up against, you know, Barcelona or Chelsea, but competing against each other, which should be exciting. We spoke to Aitana Bonmati last week after she got the Ballon d'Or for the 3rd consecutive year, and she said she's really excited and thinks it'll be really good for the women's game. So we hope so. Yeah, it's promising. Like Emily says, we open with some huge games this week: Lyon against Arsenal, Barcelona against Bayern Munich. Sometimes think perhaps UEFA fix those fixtures a little bit to hook us from the first round. We'll certainly get it in the men's competition as well.
You just mentioned Arsenal there, Sam. Just Emily then. Obviously, the holders not started the WSL particularly well. Are you expecting them to make another run up? Could we possibly see back-to-back wins for Arsenal, or is that a bit too much, do you think?
I think it's going to be a really big ask of them. Like you said, they haven't had a good start to this season. They've dropped 7 points in the league already, and we're only 5 games deep. So there's been a lot of adjustment. I think this was meant to be the big season that they really proved they could compete domestically. They've been 6 years without a WSL title. And so a lot of focus was on trying to regain some of that dominance in England. And that's not worked out well for them. But obviously last year they had a really slow start and then picked up massively in the Champions League and won it. So it is really early to see how they're going to do. I do think, you know, they say that the hardest bit is staying at the top once you've got there. And I think other teams are really coming for them this season. So it's going to be really tough for them. I would love to say that we'll see them in the final, but I don't think they'll quite get there this season. I think they'll kick on until the quarterfinals, semi-finals, but I do think getting to another consecutive final is going to be a big ask for them. And I don't think they've got everything ready and set at the minute to get them there. I think had they had a better start to this season so far, it might be a slightly different story of what I'd be saying to you now, but right now, I just don't see it that they're going to get to that final with how they're playing, and a lot of the gaps, a lot of the issues that they're having. They're creating their own issues. You know, they're the architects of their own problems these past few games, and you know, against teams like Lyon, then that's not going to cut it. So I do think it's going to be a bit too much of an ask for them to get to a consecutive final this season.
And Sam, you know, obviously Arsenal beat Barcelona in the final last season. They've reached 5 straight finals. I know there's been a lot of talk about the cost cutting at Barcelona in general, and you know, across the women's team as well. Are Barcelona still as strong as they always were, or maybe are we seeing perhaps a little dip in terms of the strength of their overall squad?
Yeah, we have to be careful when we speak about Barcelona because, like you say, and I've fed into this as well because it is true. There's been a lot of cost cutting across the club, but that's fed into the women's team this year, and we have seen sort of big departures in terms of, you know, perhaps Fridolina Rolfo was perhaps the biggest surprise. You know, perhaps, you know, youngsters like, you know, Jana Hernandez wasn't expected to leave because expected to be, you know, part of the club moving forward. But we haven't seen any any top talent go. Their team is still as strong as it's ever been. They've got good youngsters coming through. So what they've done is they've stripped the depth out a little bit. But, in terms of the 11, they're still really strong. They've added Laia Alejandre in defence to compete with Mapi Leon and Laia Alejandre. And then, like we've seen with the men's team at Barcelona in recent years, it's always become sort of an opportunity. And already early on in this season, we've seen sort of youngsters coming through. We've seen Clara Jordi, a young midfielder, sort of come into the team. She scored at the weekend. And we've also got sort of a batch of players who were perhaps not getting as many minutes as they could have done in recent years because of the depth, who now have the chance to get those minutes, or certainly to kick on sort of young players. If you look at sort of, I might sound stupid here because I'm talking about someone who's finished third in the Ballon d'Or, but Salma Parayuelo, for example, she still needs to sort of really sort of claim her place in this team and kick on. Claudia Pina, we did see her sort of come in and claim her place last season, but she's another one who now needs to sort of be consistent and carry that on to this season. Kika Nazareth, who obviously signed the summer before, injury sort of ruled her out at the end of last season. She's another one who's perhaps not started this Barca side as much as she could, but will want to this season. So we've got players who are sort of ready to sort of step in and, take on the baton from, Alexia Putellas, Graham Hansen, Aitana Bonmati, the players that we've seen over recent years. And they're still, on paper, the best team, probably along with Lyon, just ahead of Chelsea for me in the competition. But the worry is, without that depth, how they will be, come the knockout stages, come March, April time.
Well, another one of the big four, Emily, and back to the WSL with Chelsea, obviously dominant domestically, no final though in the Champions League since 2021. Is there a particular reason why you don't think Chelsea have managed to get over the line in Europe?
I think last season was the season we all thought they were going to get there, and then everything just fell apart for them in that semi-final. Sonia Bonpastor, probably for the first time since she joined Chelsea last summer, got her tactics wrong. They really just didn't know what to do, and then they didn't make the right changes in that second leg. And it was a complete demolition job by Barcelona. And it was really disappointing because, like we say, they built such an incredible squad. They have so much depth. If we're talking depth now, Barcelona have slightly slimmed down their squad. They've probably got one of the best looking squads on paper, but something isn't clicking for them. And we've seen it even now that, they bought in Kira Walsh, which was a great signing, but it's not really working for them in midfield. They've got the same issues that they had last season. And it's really hard to pinpoint exactly what's going wrong. I think had they got their tactics right last year in the semi-final, they probably would have made that final. And again, like we say now, I don't know really whether they're going to kick on. It's quite a difficult place to be for them because on paper, everything looks like it could be Chelsea's year, but then they're not the most convincing team at the minute to watch. And there's something in that, you don't have to play the prettiest football if you're winning games. But against a team like Barcelona early on, when you're getting down to the knockouts, that something has to start clicking for them, and it's not at the minute. I would love to say as a Chelsea fan that they could get there, but I always have that little bit of reservation that something's not working, and potentially, and we've seen that with Arsenal, they can't compete in the WSL, but they compete in Europe, that potentially just competing in the WSL and the Champions League at the minute simultaneously is just not possible. The competition is so high in both areas that potentially we're just seeing teams that can't rotate enough. But you would think with the squad they've got, the depth they've built and the tactics they are starting to develop a little bit more under Sonia, and with a bit more time now with her leadership, that hopefully that will be the season. This will be the season they'll get to the final, but there's always that little bit of something that they'll get to that semi-final and potentially the wheels will fall off again. So it's a really hard thing to call, and part of me just doesn't want to say, yeah, they'll get there, this is the season, because it hasn't been for a few years. So it's really hard, and I do think something needs to give if they're going to make it, and I don't know what that is.
How big is it for them that Sam Kerr is back? Obviously been missing for a long time now. It's massive that she's back.
Yeah, it's huge for them. Like I was saying before, they haven't played the prettiest football. They've had to, 10 of their 19 wins last season in the league were 1-goal margins. And you think, what's missing? And obviously Sam Kerr wasn't there. And she was the person that was finishing games. She was really, really important for them the past few seasons. So it's basically like having a new signing back, essentially. She's been out for 22 months. So it's basically like you've got a whole other player coming back in, and it's so exciting for the team. And I think it's such an important place for Sonia to have an extra player up front where they haven't got Moira Ramirez until the start of next year, possibly even longer. So it's going to be really important. And she's got enough time to build up that game time. Obviously, being away for nearly 2 years is a long time not to play football, and they can't rush her back. It's really important that it's a progressive, slow reintroduction to football for her. But there's enough time between now and hopefully if they get into the knockouts between then to really build up her minutes and really get her confidence back. And I think that is going to be really important for Chelsea, is how they reintegrate Sam Kerr, how they use her, and then how fit she's going to be towards the back end of the competition, and when she can really make a difference. And that's going to be when Chelsea really need her.
Sam, just back to you then to round out the kind of the big four. Lyon, obviously, huge European pedigree. Are we expecting them as well to be realistic challengers? Going for a 9th title, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm absolutely fascinated to see how Lyon do this season. And this is the big narrative for me, really, in the Champions League, because obviously they're under new management in Jonathan Heraldes, who was obviously the Barcelona coach, who, for me, obviously took on a successful Barcelona team, but he really took them to another level in terms of how they played football, which they sort of struggled to reach again last year under Pere Romeu. And he's now the Lyon coach, which has sort of caught Barca by surprise. Obviously, he left Barca sort of 18 months ago, was it now, for Washington Spirit, obviously part of the same group as Lyon, and they were surprised that he was coming back to Europe so quickly with Lyon. So there's a little bit of sort of morbo, as they say in Spanish football, a bit of sort of added rivalry, added heat to that sort of Barca-Lyon sort of dynamic, which has been sort of one of the overriding narratives of this competition in recent years anyway. Obviously, with Lyon winning so many in a row, Barcelona then coming along and trying to sort of take the crown from them as the queens of Europe. Perhaps you could argue taking it from them over the last couple of years, finally beating them in a final in Bilbao. And now they're going to come up against their old coach, Heraldes, if they do meet later in the competition. I think that's going to be fascinating. And obviously what Emily said, I think when you look at that Chelsea squad, so much depth. I think Lyon as well, the amount of players they've added in the summer, the sort of quality they've got at their disposal, the sort of, in comparison to Barca, it's sort of light and dark in terms of their activity in the summer. So it's going to be really, really fascinating. They've got so much depth, so much quality. They've obviously picked off players from some of the other best teams in Europe, with Katota coming from Paris Saint-Germain, and incredible goal scorer Jules Brandt, obviously coming from Wolfsburg, one of the stronger German sides. Even Ingrid Engen, who was perhaps sort of a squad player, but a really useful player at Barca, running down her contract and going to Lyon as well, back with her old coach. It's going to be really, really fascinating to see if Heraldes can get sort of Lyon playing that way he had Barca playing, and then especially if they meet them later in the tournament in semi-final or final or whatnot. I think it could be explosive with all those sort of themes under running.
Then just one WSL team that we've not mentioned yet, Man United, obviously making their debut in the competition proper. Emily, what are we expecting from them? Obviously, there's quite a significant reunion with Mary Earps coming back as well with PSG. What kind of reception are you expecting that she might get?
I mean, if we know Man United fans, they're gonna boo her. They boo Alessia Russo every time Arsenal go back there. They're gonna boo her. And I think, it was a really interesting time at Man United a couple of seasons ago. They had a massive exodus over 2 years where so many of their top talent went, like Earps. And because she went on as a free agent, and because she didn't leave in the best of terms of the club, her statement when she left kind of talked about how the direction of the club didn't align with what she wanted anymore, and she wanted to win big, and the club weren't there at the time. You would kind of expect it not to be the best of receptions. However, she's a fan favourite, and people love Mary Earps regardless of the club she plays with. So there are going to be people there that are going to be cheering for her. And it is going to be really interesting seeing her come back, because she hasn't had the best start in the league. She conceded 6 against Lyon recently. So coming back to Man United is going to be a little bit difficult. I do think that the game being at Old Trafford is probably going to be slightly helpful for her, because she's not going back to Leigh Sports Village, which, is quite a hostile place to go. Man United fans are incredibly vocal. They're incredibly loud. They're one of the best fan bases that we've got in women's football. But that's probably going to be a little bit more of a benefit for her, that she's not facing that hostile environment at Leigh Sports Village. But Man United is such an interesting team, because on paper they are really competitive. They have a really good record, really good defensive record, but it's their first crack at this competition, and they have a really thin squad. We've mentioned it with Barcelona, but Man United at times already this season have only had 5 outfield subs. And that's not a place you want to be when you're trying to compete in the Champions League and the WSL at the same time. And they're having consistent injuries coming up to some of their key players. So it's going to be a really tough ask for them, I think, in this period, especially in their introduction to continental football. But I think both Sam and I had them to finish somewhat in the playoffs in our predictions. And you would think that they're probably kind of at that sort of middle pack where they're slightly better than some of the teams. They've got the development than some of the other teams in some of the other countries, but they're probably not. You haven't got enough confidence in them to really kick on to knockouts and say they're going to be surely there. But, if they can keep their squad fit until Christmas, I think they have a really good chance at getting into those playoffs. And then it's anyone's game, really.
I mean, just on United, and from a personal point of view, having covered the men's team for so long, I would really like Sir Jim Radcliffe to turn up to one of these games and show his support. I think it was quite a bad look really that he missed both those FA Cup finals. It seems such a small thing for him just to turn up and sit in the stands. Presumably, Emily, you would quite like for him to show that kind of support, and be present at one of these games at least.
100%. I think it's been really disappointing that we haven't seen Ratcliffe get behind the women's team, especially when, the most recent FA Cup final, they actually moved the men's game to the Friday, to allow people to be able to be at both games and then for him still not to show up. I think it's a really bad look, and it is really disappointing when you've got a really important team and you've got such an exciting team. There's a lot of way for Man United to go to be kind of in the same breadth as Chelsea and Arsenal. They haven't got the history and they haven't got the sort of money that they have yet, but they're such an exciting team and they have played incredibly well the past couple of seasons. So it is really disappointing that we've just not seen that support. And I think, when we speak to Mark Skinner, he's always very positive about the management, but the optics of it is really, really bad. And I think it's the sort of thing that you really want to be able to get behind the team and support them in those games, and for your kind of senior management within the club to not be doing that. You have to think kind of as a player and as people around the club that, what is going on here? What more can we be doing to really get that support? And it is disappointing. And I think, there's going to be a lot more questions asked of Ratcliffe if they don't show up to any of the Champions League games, the same way that we asked the same questions with the FA Cup finals and some of the big league games as well, and they at some point have to give an answer as to why they're consistently not showing up for the women's team. And it is just overall disappointing that we're 2 years in and still haven't really seen that sort of big support that we've seen other owners and other management giving to other clubs. So I think, it's going to be a really interesting period for the club as a whole over the next couple of months.
Well, on to predictions then. I've read both of your predictions. Both of you have got the same top four with Barca, Lyon, Chelsea and Arsenal in your top four. Sam, we'll start with you first. Are you expecting the winner to come from that group? Are we going to see any kind of major shocks with that top four, do you think?
I mean, any prediction of a shock is you're just sort of grabbing something from thin air. Obviously, Arsenal would have been considered a shock last year. I don't think anyone, even before this, even when they got to the semi-finals with, Lyon and then a final as possible, Barcelona or Chelsea would have predicted them to win it. So it can happen, which is, I think, a good thing for the competition last year, because it sort of opens up the field, perhaps in terms of, whether it's the German sides, whether it's Arsenal again, whether it's, even Real Madrid, who, listening to Emily talk about Manchester United, there's perhaps a lot of similarities there, and perhaps you want them to kick on a little bit more. But under a new manager, they beat Barcelona for the first time earlier this season. They do invest in players. Obviously, they lost to Arsenal, but they beat Arsenal in the first leg. So I think will be a clutch of teams that now think, look, Barca, Lyon, Chelsea are beatable. Arsenal have shown it, but no, I don't see anyone outside of Barcelona, Lyon, or Chelsea winning it. And like I said, I think Barcelona and Lyon are just ahead of Chelsea for perhaps the reasons Emily said as well. You're just waiting for a little bit of a click from Chelsea. If you're just looking at the squad, you'd probably say Chelsea or Lyon and Barcelona third. But on what we've seen and, the last couple of years, you'd probably put Chelsea just away from those two. I don't think we'll see Arsenal win it again. I don't think, Real Madrid or a German side could win it. But with this new format and, like I said, with Arsenal, who knows?
Emily, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think... a lot of similar points to what Sam said. I think last year, I don't think anyone expected Arsenal to win it. Even Arsenal fans went to Lisbon purely to say that, it was a bit of fun. It was a couple of days holiday. None of them really expected to come away with the trophy. So it is, it's anyone's game at the end of the day, especially when you've kind of got those two legs. Arsenal came back in both of their quarter and semi-finals to get to the final. So, it could be anyone's game. I do agree with Sam that as much as I think Chelsea have everything in their locker, it's just not, they haven't got everything all together and cohesive to really get to that final. But maybe I'll be proven wrong. I do think, like Sam said, Lyon are in a really great shape, and I am really excited to see what they're going to do, especially first game up being Arsenal. They're going to want to really make a statement after how they went out of the competition last season. So I think if they get that right, and they've got a fairly decent draw, you expect a team like Lyon to be able to cope with that. And I think they've got a lot to really build momentum. Like Sam said, but some of the German teams, I think Bayern Munich have one of the hardest draws that you could have gotten in this, playing some of the top teams. And we've seen them be really kind of unpredictable, but in the negative side of that as well, that they haven't really shown a lot of consistency. And I do think it's going to be between Lyon, Barcelona and in that final. And I do think Arsenal and Chelsea will get to the knockouts and get deep into the competition, but I'm just not entirely sure that either of them have enough to be able to get back to that final. But there could be a surprise. There's a few dark horses there. Vålerenga have avoided all the top big four teams in the draw, and you would think that a team like that potentially would be in and around the playoffs. But we've seen surprises in this format before, so they're someone that you probably wouldn't want to count out if they can get a few good games under their belt. But there are a few teams in and around that middle section that if they can get some momentum and get a good run of form that and can get through that playoff, that potentially could have some surprises. Roma are one of them that I think people slightly underestimate where they are, but we've seen them have a really good run before. So potentially they'll make it into the knockouts and could kick on and have the Arsenal style fairy tale ending. But it's anyone's game at the minute. And it's just really exciting that it's really tough to call where we are at right now, because past couple of seasons, you've kind of predicted where we're going to end up. So it's exciting that we can't really predict it right now.
Well, that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks to Emily and to Sam. Remember to watch all the Women's Champions League on Disney Plus this season, and we'll be back with more football reporters next week.